It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's list week. That's right. This is the time when we're able to take a little bit of a step back and review the year that has just transpired, say goodbye to last year and hello to the next year. And I've been saying this pretty much since the summer that 2022 was full of amazing music, and trying to whittle this down to a top 10 was near impossible. So I want to do a top 20 for this year's top list of the albums of this year, because there was just so much good music that came out this year that limiting it to only 10 felt like a crime. So yeah, we're going to do a full top 20. The usual ground rules of these top 10s. Obviously, I've heard every single release that came out this year. I ran all the albums through an empirical database, and so I can definitively say that these are objectively the best records of the year. Jesus. Absolutely not. Obviously, I haven't been able to hear everything that came out this year. Hell, I haven't even heard all of the prog rock records, and I'm supposed to be the prog rock person here on YouTube. Yeah, obviously, I haven't heard everything, and this list is just 100% subjective. Anyway, I've been talking way too much about this. Let's just dive in and talk about my favorite albums of 2022, starting with number 20. And I'm not going to do the whole title card thing that I've done the past year. I'm just going to put the album back here right beside me so you can tell. I've also linked all these albums in alphabetical order by artist or band, so there's no spoiler alerts, but you can at least follow along, and all my reviews of all these albums are down below as well. So starting us off with number 20, we've got The Loneliest Time by Carly Rae Jepsen. Great album, great pop effort. I think this is her most strong and mature album, even though it might not necessarily be her most cohesive one. And The Loneliest Time, the actual title track on this, was my most listened to track of this year, at least in my opinion. I came back to this track time and time again. At number 19, we have High Castle Teleorchestra, The Egg That Never Opened. If you want something that is just balls to the wall insanity from start to finish with just pure artistic jazz ridiculousness, you're going to absolutely love this record. This is a type of album that I have never heard anything like this before, and in 2022, with however many years of music that came before us, that is a feat all in itself. We have another pop record with Aurora, The Gods We Can Touch. This one came out pretty early on in the year, and I just found myself humming and singing along to this. I've had a number of tracks stuck in my head all year on this record. It's bumping, it's optimistic, it's fun. It's that kind of pick up and go music that I love to listen to, kind of in between a little bit more of the heavy hitting albums and tracks that I love. At number 17, we've got Black Midi with Hellfire. This one improved upon everything that I loved about their last album. This really goes to show that in popular music, progressive rock is still very much alive and well. I'm loving how they are really stretching their legs in more of the prog sphere, and not just relying themselves on this jazz rock that they've kind of formulated within their first two records. Hellfire shows that Black Midi is still on an upward swing, even though this is their third album, and they have lots of gas in their tank. At number 16, we have Black Country New Roads album, Ants From Up There. And if Black Midi had a lot of gas in their tank, Black Country New Road kind of lost the car after this one, as the lead singer, a week or so before this album even dropped, said that he was leaving the band. But I've been loving this record. This is one that really goes to show that this indie rock and experimental indie rock is still very much alive and well within this day and age. I'm loving the longer sequencing of music that they have on here, a lot bigger build-ups on here, and I mean, this is what Arcade Fire should be sounding like in 2022, instead of what they actually ended up putting out. At number 15, we go more into my wheelhouse with some good progressive metal of Persephone with their Metanoia album. Been loving this album. It's full of some of the best music that I've heard from Persephone. I'm loving a lot of the builds on this album, and it has some of the best progressive metal from the genre of this year. Number 14, a new record from a new band, King Buffalo with their Regenerator album. I love this one. I'm loving the builds on this. Really like utilizing that space rock, this kind of jam rock sessions to create some of the best jams that I've heard all year. They're not afraid to stretch a track well into the 10-minute mark, and it really does service the song when so many artists within the past 3 to 4 decades are keeping their songs nice and concise. King Buffalo shows now we have no problem bringing up the ante pretty high. At number 13, an album that came out pretty early on in this record cycle, which was Rollo Tomasi's Where Myth Becomes Memory. Been loving this album all year. Every once in a while, I'll just return back to it and just get blown away. These guys are really the masters of the blending that shoegaze, more post-rock ambient sounds with just hard-hitting death metal that will blow your socks off. So talk about being able to balance the really, really hard, heavy stuff with the heavenly, beautiful stuff. Really, really dig these guys. At number 12 is one that I would have probably liked a lot better if they didn't lean so heavily on their influences, and that was Perius's The Signal Heard Throughout Space. On face value, this album is magnificent. I'm loving all the sounds, the build-ups, the chugging. This is my favorite style of progressive metal, but man, I can't listen to this album without really seeing the Irish Dream Theater. There's Between the Buried and Me, there's Native Construct, there's Haken. And it brings me out of the listening experience. But if you're able to kind of distance yourselves from their influences, this is some of the best progressive metal music that I've heard all year and really does beg to be listened to. And finally, at number 11, Hannah Peel and Para Orchestra, The Unfolding. This album was probably the album that I listened to most this year. I was reading a lot of underwater deep sea exploration books in the summer, and this was the soundtrack to that throughout the entire time. I'm loving Hannah Peel's heavenly sounds and the Para Orchestra's deep layering of all the different instruments. This is neoclassical experimental rock at its finest. Where I was disappointed quite a bit with some of the releases within this kind of genre, this one really blew me away, and I kept coming back to it time and time again. All right, we're into the top 10 now. I'm going to slow down my pace a little bit, take a little bit of a breather, and allow you guys to really get some good creative wordsmithing with these descriptions of the album. At number 10, we have King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with their album Changes, the last of their 5-album streak of 2022, starting it off with In Timeland and ending it with Changes. This was the last album that they released, and they went out with a bang. They went out with probably their best work this year, and the best work that I've heard from them since probably 2017 or so. And I specifically talking about this album because I'll talk about their other albums in future videos. Loved how kind of on their game they are with this one. Now, I do know that this one took a little bit of time to really flesh out and bring to the forefront, working on it for a number of years, but it doesn't feel disjointed like a lot of albums that took a number of years that I will talk about in future videos. Kind of had. It felt very unified. It felt very like they sat down in the sessions for a specific time and just banged out all this music, and it is the best kind of jam rock, that kind of garage rock, that really experimental, almost proggy rock that they like to have, and it is quintessential King Gizzard. This was my favorite record from them this year, and my favorite one from them probably since One Gone Land. At number 9, we have an album from a band that I didn't even really knew existed, but they have a little bit of a legacy. This was one of the longer stretches between albums for any band that I had recognized and reviewed this year, and that's Gospel with their record The Loser. I found myself coming back to this record time and time again. Their blending of that really hardcore, almost punk-like aggression with this very overlaid, very symphonic presentation and style of music. This raw, this gripping, this energetic, this very abrasive and aggressive nature, but paired with a lot of orchestration and a lot of keen eye for rhythms and harmonies that really fly by you in a blink of an eye. I'm loving a lot of the more traditional sounds that are found on here, like the use of electric pianos, the use of a lot of synthesizers and Moog Mellotrons. Loving a lot of these passages on here, and the build-ups on this one. Holy geez, this would put a lot of prog rock artists, strictly prog rock artists, to shame with their amount of build-ups, with their amount of payoffs. If you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive, a little bit sharper with a lot of teeth, you're going to be really, really pleased with this one. So Yeah, and with this one, there's also the follow-up of the 24-minute track that they were putting out. I feel like this is a 1-2 punch from gospel, and it's a band that I'm going to be paying attention for. At number 8, we come into an album that I friggin' loved. Like, all these I friggin' love, but this one in particular, I was really, really blown away by their use of build-ups, their use of payoffs, their use of breakdowns, and that is Abstract Illusion with their album Woe. This album has some of the best death metal that I've heard all year. Like, their breakdowns, I just feel like I want to get into the pit and just let loose, you know? Like, the breakdown that's on, like, the midpoint of this album, just... like, holy geez, a lot of other bands would be like, okay, we're done after a couple of measures, a couple of bars, but these guys hung on and would not let go, and it kept hitting me over the head time and time again. That begged me, come back and listen to it. I think this is one of the best death metal records that we have on here, and the fact that I believe this was only done by 3 fellas makes me even more gush about it. Like, oh boy. Yeah, this was probably my favorite death metal record of the year, and one that I have come back to pretty regularly. At number 7 is probably the most recent album on this list, and one that I cannot get enough of, and that is Wise Blood with her album In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. Oh boy, what do I even say about this album? This is hauntingly beautiful. I mean, I did a review just last week about this album, and I am still in the thick of it. I feel like this is an album that I'll be listening to a lot in 2023, just with how much I'm currently listening to it. It has such a deep and resonant sound on it. It's combining a lot of my favorite styles from artists like Kate Bush, really putting it into this proggy kind of art-felt rock, and you're finding a lot of that within like the smaller sequencings that we have on here, like a lot of the arpeggios that are found within the mixing on here. It really shows that Natalie really knows how to orchestrate a track and when to add inflections and when to just focus in on her voice. Like, I believe God Turned Me Into a Flower, like half of it is just her harmonizing with the music that's around it, very similar to a Sigur Rós track that left me just so emotional. You know, it was so beautiful and so heavenly that I couldn't help but just fall in love with it. At number 6, probably the exact opposite on here, we have Zealand Ardor's self-titled release. I've always kind of kept my eye on Zealand Ardor. You know, I've always really enjoyed what they were doing with this black metal kind of outfit, this kind of you know, almost satanic rock at times, but, you know, very tongue-in-cheek, you know, like very, very tongue-in-cheek in their presentations of it. And this one kind of continues that, but I'm really loving that more black metal and more like, and black both in terms of black, the music style, but also black in the culture and really that aggression that's being fueled about it. You know, you have all this legacy that's found behind it within the music and, you know, the history. And I'm loving that kind of style because a lot of these really have that inflection on here. I think this is kind of like the most concentrated and most essential style of their sound so far, which makes sense as this is their self-titled release. A lot of the tracks on here I keep coming back to, and this with the Hannah Peel Orchestra were probably, you know, the 2 albums that I listened to the most this year. All right, coming into the top 5, and starting us off was the first album of this year that I thought was going to be the album of the year. You know, all 5 of these, at one point or another, I kind of had slotted in as my album of the year. The first one, you know, number 5, is Michael Romeo's War of the Worlds Part 2, lead guitarist for Symphony X. Been following his career pretty much since the Divine Wings of Tragedy. But yeah, Michael Romeo, been loving his solo stuff. Part 1 of War of the Worlds was fine. You know, I felt like it was a really good continuation of the Underworld from Symphony X. And it was good, but it never really gave me that same kind of wow factor. But man, War of the Worlds Part 2 definitely does. Like, the whole thing is just so solid from start to finish. Like, I'm loving the larger sounds that we have on here. It's not just that power metal that Symphony X likes to utilize from start to finish. It does feel like a bigger symphony is playing all around them at pretty much all turns and twists of this album. I love the continuation of the story. I love the final, like the finale finale of this album. And the second part of World of Worlds is always the hardest to put to music because of how dour and much more introspective it is, because it is taking place in an occupied Earth rather than a battlefield Earth. And just narratively, it's a lot harder to really capture the emotions because it's so introspective rather than, a spectacle. So I love what Michael Romeo did on this album. I think this is his best work to date, and I'm so excited to hear what he has next in store. At number 4, probably my favorite purely prog album on here, and it is from Ryo Okamoto with his Myth of the Monster Fist. Been loving this one. This is probably the best Box Beard album we've got since Brief Nocturnes. Love Ryo's work on here, and we've got a handful of solo projects from prog artists this year. There's still one more actually on this list that I'm going to be talking about, but like all the solo ones that I've talked about so far, this one feels like a fully fleshed out album by a band rather than a solo offshoot project from a member of a band. Because we have, as I mentioned, we have had a few of those this year and last year that really did feel much more like a side project rather than a project in and of itself. And Myth of the Monster Fist is a fully fleshed out project. Like, it feels like its own entity without having to lean on the legacy of the band that, has this artist on it. And I love how he's able to utilize a lot of the people that he's worked with throughout the ages, specifically on Spock's Beard, but also above and beyond. And that title track of the Myth of the Monster Fist, probably the best prog epic we've gotten in the past 5 years, if I'm being perfectly honest. I can't think of another prog epic that has hit me this hard, and I've been loving it. Like so many of these retro prog groups that are doing longer stretches of music can really learn a couple of things from this track. I've been loving it. It's a great effort from Ryo, and for somebody that loves retro prog, I was so glad to have this in the wheelhouse. I absolutely loved it. At number 3, another prog solo artist at our helm, Charlie Griffith with Tic Tac Alaka. Charlie, I want to thank you personally for this album. This was an absolute treat, really getting back to the root of progressive metal, I feel like so many progressive metal bands are either metal or progressive, but marrying the two is so hard, and I feel like Charlie was able to really do both so incredibly well. I love the fact that he went back to basics and only played 6-string guitars. He didn't put in the 7th or 8th string that he's been using with Haken. He just brought on that 6, and it just sounds so good. I'm loving how brutal this album is. This is one of the heavier outfits that I've heard from Charlie in some time. But I'm also loving how soothing and how, symphonic it sounds at the same time. Again, it's the perfect marriage, the perfect blending between the progressive side and the metal side of things. And the guest stars and the guest vocalists that he has on here, just each one fits the bill so well. Like Tommy Rogers opening and closing this on vocals. We have Jordan Rudess coming on for a guest spot on the keyboards. Everything on this album is done to the best aspect. Again, much like how Ryo wrote the best Spock's Beard album, Charlie wrote his best album, it doesn't sound anything like a lot of the Haken stuff, even though you can kind of see a little bit of the Haken DNA on it. This thing is its own beast, its own entity, and I've loved it one. Great record from Charlie, and one of the best albums I've heard from anybody from the Haken scene, probably since The Mountain. Just absolutely blew me away. At number 2, we have the Von Hertzen brothers, the Red Alert and the Blue Forest. This one just came out of nowhere for me, and I've been loving the band's ability to orchestrate some amazing build-ups and payoffs. This album has some of my absolute favorite tracks of this year, starting with The Promise, Peace Patrol, Anil, and Northern Lights. These 4 tracks easily could have been my favorite tracks of this album, and honestly, this was part of the reason why I kept coming back to it. Some of the best music that I've heard within the past 5 years in progressive rock. The build-ups, the payoffs, the allowing themselves the space and energy to just allow their tracks to grow. And they were also showing that they're not just a strictly pure prog outfit. They do allow themselves a little bit more of a poppy approach with tracks like All of a Sudden You're Gone and Elbowed and Disappear There. I mean, the album starts off with Day of Reckoning, which is a really great banger. So yeah, this album covers a lot of ground, but yeah, it's like the tracks on here are prog in its purest form, you know, not allowing themselves any hindrance and just allowing the tracks to really grow and develop on their own. Highly recommend this one. This was the first, like, I was sure and certain that this would be my number one album of this year, but we got one more. And before I go to my number one album of the year, I want to do just a few honorable mentions, just really, really quickly. First one is The Deer Hunters of Antimai. I love this record. I love the concept of it. I'm really excited to see where Casey goes from here within the, the Indigo Child and the Antimai world. Another one was the Mars Volta self-titled release. I know not a lot of people were a big fan of this one, but I found myself gravitating to it again and again and again. I love this one. Going a little bit more into the poppy stream, I thought that Orville Peck's Bronco was just brilliant. I love his take on country and more of like an indie pop artist stream. It's very heartfelt. If you're a fan of the singer-songwriter, I think you'll really get a kick out of this one. Going kind of 180 into a, straight up almost speed death metal, Rings of Saturn. Again, another self-titled work from them. Love their aggression. I love their energy. This is probably the best Rings of Saturn because they weren't relying on the screaming, the yelling, the lyrics. It's a purely instrumental album, and it works so well to their benefit, and they came out with their best record to date. And finally, the latest one on this one is Elder Innate Passage. I've been loving this record, and a lot of people are giving it a lot of praise, and it is well deserved in that case. I've been really, really enjoying how big the songs are on this one. It feels like something that like Motorcycle would be putting out. Very jammy, very space rock, very psychedelic and acid rock in that case. Loved it. Okay, so enough beating around the bush. Let's get to the number one record of the year. And if you've been following my videos, if you've been watching my reviews, this one shouldn't come as any surprise. It was the only album this year to get the masterpiece status. That is Toe Hider's I Have Little to No Memories of These Memories. My number one album of the year, the album of 2022 in my mind. Michael Mills from Down Under has created and crafted the best progressive rock album of the year. Hands down. Like, he is able to blend all these different motifs, styles, and themes into a 40 plus minute track. Like, that is just pure prog that I've ever encountered. Being able to blend math rock with, and not only blend within the same time, but also between the times as well. He'll go from passages that sound very math rocky to tracks that sound like passages and moments that sound very doom metal. He ends the album, at least the streaming version of this album, because again, prog to its core, there are two versions of this album, one that has a happy ending and one that has a sad ending, and the sad ending is only available on record, on vinyl, but the streaming happy ending of this record basically is if a band like Triumph from the 80s, that big arena rock hair metal, wrote Supper's Ready, that big finale of Supper's Ready, that big power, that big stance at the end. This thing covers so much ground in relatively so little time. Like, bands would sell their souls to sound something like this. And yeah, Mike Mills is able to capture that and do it so well, and do it all by himself. He plays everything. 100% of this album is him. And that is really what wows me, because at no point do I ever feel like, I really wish that guitar lick or that guitar solo was a little bit more well developed, or I really wish you had more of drum fills here. Like, everything is like, it blows me away because I can't think of anything that can be improved upon on this album. The storyline is hysterical and so much fun to follow along. Yeah, this is pure prog rock in its essence, and it's the reason why this is the #1 album of this year. It's the one that gets the album of the year for Notes Reviews on this channel. And Michael Mills, you need to applaud yourself, because what you have done is outstanding. It's absolutely outstanding. So yeah, there you go. Those are my 20 albums of 2022. I thought it was funny that it would be 2022. But yeah, those are mine. What are your top 10 or top 20 albums of 2022? That's a lot of 20s. Let me know of your list. Let me know if you agree with my list. If you inevitably disagree, by commenting down below. I really love seeing what everybody's favorite albums of the year are. It really helps me start 2023 on a good footing, because what I scan other people's top 10s, top 20s, top 50s, and I find where the gaps are within my listening. And so I start the next year listening to a bunch of those albums, and it always starts off the year on a great foot. So yeah, let me know all about those by commenting down below. That's all I've got for you guys. So tomorrow, or I guess on Wednesday, we have our surprises, disappointments, and albums, because I don't like doing a worst list. So what I do is a disappointments and then surprises as well. And then on Friday, I'm pretty excited to do my Prog Awards. I'm really excited to start that out and have some fun with that. So get ready for that. And that's all I've got for you guys today. That's all I've got. Happy 2022. Happy listening. I hope you guys check out the albums that I've listed below with all of my reviews of these albums. I hope you find something new on here. And keep spreading the good word. Keep spreading some good music out there. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, Notes out.